Boldwood presents an unromantic comedy written by Phoebe MacLeod and read by Meg Travers. The moral right of the author has been asserted. This performance is owned by Boldwood. Chapter 1. OK, Chris. I think it's safe to say that Tina isn't a fan of your gift. Talk us through it. I can't say I blame Tina. The vibrator sitting on the table between Chris and his wife is most politely described as challenging. Enormous would be another suitable word, along with what the bloody hell, which I accept is a phrase rather than a word. In my time as a sex and relationship therapist, plenty of vibrators have come and gone through my treatment room. I'm generally fairly positive about them. When I think they will be beneficial, I recommend them. But they can be controversial, and when I think they might make things worse, I steer well clear. However, the object that Chris has brought into therapy today is quite unlike any of the vibrators that I've ever recommended. During the brief demonstration that he gave, it wriggled, buzzed, and thrusted in a most alarming manner. It also lit up with a selection of flashing lights, which completely confused me. What on earth would they be illuminating? If none of that, or the sheer size of the damn thing, were enough to put you off, the noise would. It's difficult to describe, but if you think of Angry Hornet meets asthmatic road drill, you wouldn't be far away. As a modern-day object of torture, I could see it faring pretty well. I have no doubt you could disembowel someone pretty successfully with it. As a sex toy, dear God, no. I thought it would spice things up. Do you know what I mean, Poppy? And he looks at me lasciviously. I thought it might be something she'd like to use while I watched. Tina looks revolted, and I can't say I blame her. This is their fourth session, and frustratingly, I don't seem to have managed to get through to Chris at all so far. Their presenting issue is not particularly uncommon, a mismatch in libido that's causing friction in their marriage. But so far, Chris has resolutely refused to acknowledge that the problem is anything to do with him. In his mind, Tina just needs to stop being so uptight and everything will be hunky-dory. What he has failed to see is that the constant pressure he's putting her under to do more exotic stuff in the bedroom is making things very difficult for her. I know where it's come from. I wouldn't be much good at my job if I didn't. Chris is patently a heavy porn user, even though he swore blind he wasn't when I gently challenged him about it in our first session. But when we talked about his fantasies, it was like a 1, 2, 3 checklist from the porn industry. I glanced at the clock. 15 minutes left in today's session, and then I'm not seeing them for 2 weeks, so it would be really good if I could get a breakthrough today. Why do you think Tina isn't wild about the vibrator, Chris? I don't know. It's the top of the range, and it literally does everything. It cost a pretty penny, let me tell you. I seriously doubt that. The control panel looks like it was assembled by someone doing a home electronics project, and the rest of it isn't much better. Okay, let's go back a step. Do you remember when we talked about the 4 Ps and the 4 Cs? Yeah? Talk me through them. So, you said that a lot of men think about sex as the Ps, position, performance, and penis size. Great. Do you remember the 4th one we talked about, which specifically relates to pornography? Power? That's right. There's a power imbalance portrayed in porn, which would be unhealthy in a real-world relationship. Now, what about real-world sex? What do we talk about there? The Cs. Can you remember what they are? Sorry, not exactly. I remember consent, but I'm not sure about the others. That's one of them, yes. You've also got communication, connection, and compromise. So if we look at your present Tina here, do you think it falls more into the Ps or the Cs? I think we may be starting, finally, to make a bit of progress, as he blushes slightly and averts his eyes. I don't know. Let's walk it through. Have you and Tina ever talked about using a vibrator? We did a bit. What does that mean? I'll tell you what it means, Tina interrupts. It means he mentioned it to me once, and I told him there was no way, and I thought it was incredibly tacky. Chris? I prompt him. Well, yeah, she did say that, but I thought she'd change her mind once she saw it. I see. And what prompted you to go for this one, rather than something smaller and more discreet, such as a bullet? Bigger is better, isn't it? I don't see how those little ones could be satisfying. You'd barely feel them. I'm not going to let us get drawn into a discussion about different types of vibrators and their uses, as I don't think that's going to help us here. Let's go back to the P's and C's. We've established that Tina made it clear that she wasn't interested in vibrators on the whole, but you felt that you could change her mind with this. Is that a fair reflection of your thinking? Yes, I thought if she tried it once, even though she made it clear she didn't want to. How do you think that made her feel? Was that an example of good communication? Of you making a connection together and compromising? Or were you trying to use your power to coerce her into doing something that she'd already said she wasn't comfortable with? No, I wasn't trying to coerce her. I was just trying to open up her mind to new possibilities, that's all. I just don't get what's wrong with what we have now. Why does it need to be spiced up? Tina chips in. Would you like to elaborate? I ask her. I know he says it's boring, but I like the missionary position. I've tried some of the things he's asked for, but they're either uncomfortable or downright degrading. There was a position he wanted to try the other week that reminded me of going for a smear test. How is that supposed to make me feel sexy? How does it make you feel? Tell Chris. She turns to him. It makes me not want to have sex with you at all, Chris. Because I worry you're going to start asking for weird stuff, so I push you away by telling you I'm not in the mood or whatever. And you find this frustrating, I expect. I say to Chris. Of course I do. Sex is important to me. When she says no, it makes me feel like she doesn't want me, that she doesn't love me. Rejection is never easy to deal with, I agree, particularly in a marriage. Do you understand what she's saying, though? I want to. It's just that there's so much out there that we haven't tried, and I wonder if we're missing out. The only way to find out is to try it, and I've never asked her to repeat anything she hasn't liked. So you're worried that everyone else is having a better time than you because they're all doing things you aren't. Let me put your mind at rest there. Very few people, a tiny minority in fact, get a thrill from extreme sex acts. Many of the positions that you'll see if you look online aren't used because they're satisfying for the participants. In fact, most of them are deeply unsatisfying, but they provide a good view of what's going on for the camera. You say you find the missionary position boring, but do you know how many animal species mate face to face? No. Pretty much just us and bonobos, which are apes similar to chimpanzees. The same for recreational sex. For most animals, mating is purely an act of procreation. What a privilege to be able to do it just for fun, and to look into each other's eyes while we're doing it. That's why the missionary position is so popular, because it provides not only a physical connection, but an emotional one as well. I'm not saying you shouldn't try other things, but only if you're both comfortable with them. This is where communication and compromise come in. If you can learn to talk openly about this stuff and explain to Tina why you want to try something, it'll be easier for her to understand, and you may find she's more willing. Does that make sense? I don't like dirty talk. It makes me feel cheap, Tina objects. I'm not suggesting dirty talk, Tina, I explain. That's something that works for some people, but by no means all. I'm talking about open and honest communication. Right, homework time. I'm going to impose a sex ban until I see you next, in 2 weeks' time. Chris looks absolutely crestfallen and Tina looks delighted. I want you to talk instead. So what you're going to do is this. You're going to tell each other what you like about sex. Each sentence must begin with either, I like it when you, I would like it if you, or, I think this could be improved if we... Do you think you could do that? Tina's not looking quite so pleased now, but Chris has perked up a bit. The important thing here is that you both do it. It won't work if one of you pushes out a long shopping list and the other says nothing, okay? What we're doing here is learning to communicate about sex openly and without shame. It might feel awkward to begin with, but trust me and stick with it. If you can learn to talk about it, the positions and all the other stuff won't matter because you'll be connecting better, learning to compromise where there are differences and, above all, building trust. I'd like you to do this at least 3 times before we meet next. The first time should be in a totally non-sexual location, fully clothed, in your sitting room, for example. Depending on how you get on, you can up the ante a little bit each time, maybe move to the bedroom for the second one, but stay fully clothed. You can be naked the third time if you're both comfortable with that. And you can also touch each other, but you must not have sex. All clear? They both nod. Great. Are there any questions? What shall I do with this? Chris asks, indicating the vibrator. I have no idea. There isn't exactly a second-hand market for these things, I'm afraid. It's unused, though. I'm sorry, Chris. I think you're better off putting it in the bin and chalking it up to experience. I don't suppose you'd like it. Professionally, I mean. He blushes as he realises what he said. I consider it for a moment. I do have a drawer of various sex toys in my desk, purely for illustrative purposes. But it's so big. I doubt whether it will fit in there. And I can't think what I'd use it to illustrate, apart from how not to do it. I know my colleague Rachel would like to see it, though. I'll never be able to describe it adequately to her. If you're happy to leave it, I wouldn't mind showing it to my colleague, purely for professional interest. After that, we will dispose of it. Is that okay? Fine with me. Thanks, Doc. Tina walks out into the reception area, buttoning up her coat, so I take advantage of having Chris on his own. There's just one more thing, Chris, while I remember. Yes? Give the websites a rest for the next couple of weeks, will you? Concentrate on Tina, okay? He blushes furiously, but nods. I don't like having to be so direct with clients, as it can put them off and break what is often a very fragile connection. But I think we've made real progress here, so a little more pressure might just do the trick. I watch them leave together before going back into my office to write up my notes and pack up for the day. I leave the door open so I can hear when Rachel's last clients leave. We normally head to the pub for a quick drink after work on a Friday, but I have a little surprise in store for her first. Chapter 2. Hands up, don't move, and don't turn around. As soon as I heard Rachel's clients leave, I stole over to her office door and waited until her back was turned. I managed to creep in unobserved, and now I'm pressing the vibrator into the small of her back. Shit, Poppy! You made me jump, you cow! What the bloody hell is that? She asks, as she turns around and claps eyes on it for the first time. A little gift from Christina, I tell her. We don't normally give clients nicknames, but their two names run together so perfectly it was impossible not to. He bought it for her to spice things up, and unsurprisingly, she wasn't keen. What do you think? It's obscene! Where on earth did he get it from? I don't know. I haven't seen anything like it before. eBay? Maybe. And why have you got it? I managed to convince him that it wasn't appropriate. He was going to throw it away, but he gave it to me so I could show it to you. Look, it has lights and everything. I turn it on to show her, and her eyes widen as it begins gyrating and flashing. What on earth do you need lights on a sex toy for? I don't know. It might be helpful if you were using it in the dark, I guess, so you could see where you were going. I turn off the light in her office and close the door so we can appreciate the vibrator in all its illuminated glory. I don't know about you, Poppy, but if all I could see was that coming towards me, making that horrible noise, my first instinct would be to run, she observes. It's a bit of a mood killer. I agree, as I turn the lights back on and switch off the vibrator. I'm not surprised Tina didn't like it. Are you? She takes it off me and examines it carefully. Is it waterproof? I doubt it. Would it work as a massager, do you think? She fires it up again and places it between my shoulder blades. Any good? It's tickling more than anything. Try pressing a little harder. She complies, but after a few moments, it starts making a horrible grinding sound, as if the parts inside are ripping themselves to pieces. And then there's a loud crack and it stops moving completely. Oh, you've broken it, I say. No Secret Santa for you this year if you're just going to break the gifts I bring you. I take it off her and throw it in the bin. You can't put it in there, she exclaims. You'll traumatise the cleaners, especially if it comes back to life unexpectedly and starts buzzing or moving. They might think it's a snake or something and call the RSPCA. That would really land us in hot water. What am I supposed to do with it then? I don't know. Take it home and put it in your own rubbish? There's no way that thing will fit in my bag, and my rubbish is frequently attacked by foxes. Can you imagine the stories my neighbours will construct about me if they see that outside my house? Isn't there something we can put it in so the cleaners won't know what it is? We search our offices and eventually wrap the vibrator in a polythene shopping bag, which we seal up with copious amounts of sellotape. We've taken extra care to remove the batteries, to prevent it from being turned on accidentally. Once we're happy that it looks innocuous, we lock up and head to the pub. Are you looking forward to your week off? She asks me, once we're settled with a couple of glasses of wine. Honestly? Not really, I tell her. But your baby sister is getting married. That should be exciting, no? No. Why not? Don't you get on with her? It's a week with my mother, and she'll be bringing the usual truckload of disapproval. She thinks what we do is dirty, smutty and shameful, remember? You're right, I'd forgotten. She puts on a pompous voice. You are a disgrace with your desire to help people. Why do they feel the need to air their dirty linen in public anyway? Much better to repress everything and simply not talk about it. I can't help but laugh. The problem is, Rach, you'd be funnier if you weren't so close to the mark. That's exactly how she is. Oh, for goodness sake. This is the 21st century, not the 19th. It's a shit show of people struggling to cope and make sense of their lives. If we're not there to help them, who will be? I agree with you, of course I do. But that's not how my mother thinks. I put on a similar pompous voice. Problems are not there to be addressed, brought out into the open and resolved. Problems are there to be shoved firmly under the carpet and not talked about, especially problems to do with, well, you know what. You mean sex. Don't say it so openly, you brazen hussy. Poor you. Her eyes are full of pity. To be fair, I know Rachel's parents well, and they're furiously proud of the work their daughter does, and the massive amount of training we both had to go through to get where we are. They are literally the polar opposites of my family, and, to my shame, I have had the odd fantasy where they've adopted me. But then her parents are in a similar work. Her mother is a psychologist, and her father is a psychiatrist. There's a certain amount of friendly competition between them, and I always remember with a smile one of Rachel's mother's remarks to me. James thinks he's God, because all psychiatrists do. In reality, the only difference between him and me is that he writes prescriptions. Rachel is still looking at me with concern in her eyes. Doesn't she understand any of it? No. Basically, to her, I'm some sort of pervert who gets off on listening to other people talk about their sex lives. I think she genuinely believes that what I do is morally wrong, and she's passed that attitude on to Rose and Lily. Rose is the next one up from you, isn't she? Yes, Andrew's the oldest, he's married to Zoe, and they have 2 teenage children. They're fine. Zoe's a nurse, she gets what I do. Next comes Rose, married to Steve. They have 2 daughters, aged 8 and 10. Rose and I have never really got on. I was the youngest until Lily arrived, so she had this hang-up about me being my parents' little princess, and we were too set in our ways to change when Lily was born. Remind me how much younger than you Lily is. 10 years. I'm not sure she was planned, but you don't like to ask these things, and Mum would never admit it anyway. And you're stuck with them for the whole of your week off? Yep. Lily and her fiancé Dan are driving down to Cornwall today, as are Mum and Dad. The rest of us are following tomorrow. Every day between tomorrow and the wedding has a theme, I believe, although I have to confess I haven't read the emails in depth. I guess I'd better read through them all before I go, in case there's some sort of dress code. And the wedding itself? Next Saturday, at the church in Newquay, that Dan's parents go to, followed by a reception at a local hotel. All the other guests are staying there, from what I understand. The bridesmaids and ushers are coming down on Wednesday, with the stag and hen do's on the Thursday, so everyone has time to get over their hangovers, if there are any, in time for the wedding. It's all been planned with military precision. It sounds like it. I'm guessing there won't be any penis-shaped accessories at the hen do or strip clubs for the boys. Absolutely not. She's the family Christian, ever since she found God at secondary school. Rachel sniggers. You make it sound like God was hiding in a classroom or something. It does sound like a bit of a chore. Why Cornwall? Good question. The church she and Dan go to normally is plenty big enough for all the guests they wanted to invite, but it's also hideous, and there's nowhere suitable nearby for people to stay. Dan's parents live in Newquay, and they're really involved with the church there. His dad is a church warden, and his mum sings in the choir, if I remember right. He grew up there and used to go with them, so that means they can marry there. There was a bit of a kerfuffle because Lily and Dan wanted their own vicar to come and do the service, but Dan's mum said it was disrespectful to the vicar down there, who's also known Dan since he was a boy. Bloody hell. Talk about overcomplicating things, Rachel exclaims. I know. Don't get me wrong. I wish them every happiness in their marriage, but I do vaguely resent having to take a whole week out of my life for it. I could be lying on a beach in the Mediterranean instead, being served delicious cocktails by a tanned, handsome barman. You never know. There might be some interesting single men when the ushers come down. I think it's unlikely. Dan's a nice enough guy, but, well, let me put it this way. They're a good match. What do you mean? He's never going to set the world on fire. Worthy, but a little dull. Plus, I'm not really looking for anyone at the moment. That's not strictly true. I'd love to meet someone, fall in love and get married like Lily is, but that's another downside of the job. I meet someone I like and we get chatting, but the subject of work always comes up fairly early. I tell them I'm a sex and relationship therapist, but somehow they hear I'm a sex expert. From that point forward, they're either intimidated by me, worried that I'll be scoring their performance somehow, or they come over all competitive. None of these approaches are conducive to a successful relationship, so I've been single for the last 4 years, and I haven't even dated anyone for the last 12 months. It's a cruel irony that I spend my life helping other people with their relationships when it seems I'm unable to form one myself. Rachel has been a bit luckier. She's blissfully happy with Sarah, a teacher she met through a dating app 5 years ago. They've been together ever since, and moved in after their first anniversary. It wouldn't surprise me if there were wedding bells there before long. Is there any downtime? If the weather's nice, you could escape to the beach with a book and pretend you were in the Med. Rachel continues, searching for any positives we can pull out of it. God, I hope so. If I don't get any time off from them, I might end up drowning myself. Please don't do that. I need you. Ah, Rach. Are you going to miss me while I'm gone? No, I just don't want your client list on top of mine, that's all. You're such a softie. I can feel my heart melting. I know she's going to miss me, the same way I miss her when she has time off. I first met her when, newly qualified, she joined the same NHS practice as me. I was a year ahead of her, but we soon became friends and we decided to set up our own private practice 2 years ago. Some people said it was a crazy move, but Rachel was right when she said it's a shit show out there, and our books soon filled up. As our reputation grew, so did the waiting list, and we're currently trying to decide whether to bring another therapist on board. The financial plus is obvious, but we're both worried about the effect of a third person on our office dynamic. Rachel and I work very well as equal partners, and we don't necessarily want to put that at risk. We talk about it every so often, and then end up kicking the can down the road. After an hour or so, we head off in our separate directions. I'm in luck tonight. When I reach Tunbridge, there is a free parking space right opposite my tiny terraced house, and I quickly reverse the car into it. The cat has obviously heard my key in the lock because she's waiting for me in the hallway and immediately starts wrapping herself around my ankles, purring loudly. I bend down to pick her up, and the purring is so deep and loud that I can feel it resonating through my shoulder. Hello, you, I say as I stroke her soft fur. Have you missed me? The purring intensifies, and there's a slight chirrup in it now. You're not going to be so happy tomorrow, I tell her, as I carry her towards the kitchen to get her dinner. It's a week in the cattery for you, I'm afraid. She's completely unperturbed by the news, and resumes circling my feet and chirruping while I empty a sachet of her current favourite food into her bowl. I learned early on not to buy cat food in bulk. As soon as I did, she would turn up her nose and refuse to have anything to do with it. Hopefully the current favourite will last for the week she's away in the cattery. Once the cat is dealt with, I pour myself a glass of wine and wander through to the sitting room. The answer phone is blinking to tell me that I have a new message. I hit the button to play it, and almost immediately wish that I hadn't. Poppy, it's your mother. We're just about to leave, but I need to remind you that there will be children in the house this week, and they don't need to be stumbling across any of your smutty literature. You might like to do us all a favour and leave that stuff behind. See you tomorrow, don't be late. We'll be eating at 6 because Lily has organised some icebreaker games to help us get to know Dan's family a bit better. She's told them that you're a marriage guidance counsellor, so please keep to that story. We want them to think that we're a normal family. I sigh. Several years ago, not long after I'd moved into my house, a teenaged Lily sneaked up into my bedroom and found a biographical book I was reading that Rachel had recommended. It was called Nice Girls Don't, but They Really Ought to, and told the story of a young woman's journey to sexual empowerment. Out of curiosity, she'd picked it up and flicked through it. To be fair, it did have some pretty explicit passages in it, but nothing that you wouldn't expect a teenager to know about. Unfortunately, instead of putting it back on the bedside table and leaving it there, she brought it down to the living room and showed it to my mother, who took one look at the first chapter and hauled me off to my kitchen for a dressing down. I've never been allowed to forget the incident, even though it was in my house and Lily had no business being in my bedroom. I'm not even in Cornwall yet, and my mother is already irritating me. I shove the cottage pie that I've defrosted into the oven and head upstairs to read Lily's emails and pack for the week ahead. Chapter 3. Hi everyone, I'm super excited that Dan and I are finally tying the knot, and thank you for being part of this hugely special occasion for both of us. Please find the itinerary below. Friday, bridal party. Yay! Travel to Morganporth to prepare the house and allocate bedrooms. Saturday, family arrival day. You can arrive any time after 12 p.m. Before that, there may not be anyone here to welcome you, as we'll be food shopping, etc. We will be eating at 6 p.m. sharp. Please make sure you're on time as we have some icebreaker games after dinner so we can all get to know one another. Sunday, Dan and I will be going to church in Newquay, and you're welcome to join us. As you know, our faith is really important to us, and we're really looking forward to saying our vows in the church where Dan grew up. But the vicar has also promised that he will say some prayers of blessings for us on Sunday. There will be a roast dinner at the house in the evening, cooked by Dan's parents. Thank you so much. Love you guys. Monday, weather permitting, first beach day. We'll be topping up our tans so we look our best for the big day. Don't forget the sunscreen. We don't want anyone getting burned. I can't bear it anymore. Apart from the huge overuse of exclamation marks, the enforced jollity of it all makes me feel nauseous. I scan the rest of the email looking for dress clues, making sure there isn't a fancy dress party I haven't spotted. But it's all pretty anodyne stuff. There's quite a lot of time on the beach, a water sports day and a shopping day so we can pick up various knickknacks and anything we might have forgotten. A not-so-subtle wedding present reminder, I reckon. I move on to the next email, which is directed purely at me. Poppy. Thanks for agreeing to be a bridesmaid and coming to all the fittings. I've got your dress and will take it down to Cornwall with me. Please don't forget the 20 denier black tights and the shoes. It's important that you all match. Also, please no talking about your job. I don't want Dan's parents to get upset. Love, Lily. That one hasn't cheered me up either. Morosely, I start chucking clothes into my case. The cat, who has finished her dinner and followed me upstairs, thinks this is a tremendous game and is currently engaged in quite the tussle with a pair of my socks. Thankfully, the all-important tights are still in their box and of no interest to her. Otherwise, I'm sure she'd have taken great pleasure in ripping holes in them. The dark blue satin shoes that I will be wearing under my bridesmaid's dress also make it into the case unmolested. More in hope than expectation, I pack a couple of swimsuits and bikinis. I have got a selection of work-related books to read, but they're all on my Kindle, so I shouldn't risk offending anyone. I'm briefly tempted to drive back to the office, pick up a load of sex toys and hide them under everyone's pillows, but I realise that's probably childish and, as my mother would say, needlessly provocative. I don't know what it is about my family. I'm a fully functional adult, but they somehow reduce me to a rebellious adolescent every time I see them. Even Lily manages to patronise me and get my hackles up, despite being so much younger. After a while, I'm fairly certain I've got everything I need. There are a few things like toiletries and makeup that will have to go in tomorrow, and I'll double-check it before I go, but I've gone as far as I can tonight. The alarm on the oven sounds to let me know that my cottage pie is ready, so I wander downstairs, throw together a quick salad to go with it, top up my wine, and settle down to eat. Normally I'm excited the night before going away for a break, but this time I just feel resigned and a bit sad. The cat, emotionally articulate creature that she is, has decided that I'm no longer of any interest now that I'm neither feeding her nor giving her things to play with, so she's curled up on the sofa fast asleep. There's nothing on the TV I want to watch, so I make a start on my holiday reading after I've eaten and cleared up. As well as the work-related books, I've also downloaded some light fiction, and I select one of those in the hope that it will improve my mood. The story is undemanding and funny, which is just what I need, so it keeps me happily entertained until bedtime. I'm up early the next morning to take the cat to the cattery. As anyone who owns a cat knows, getting said animal into the cat carrier is a task only slightly less fraught with danger than trying to give a cat a bath or a pill. I try to lull her into a false sense of security with an extended love-in after she's had her breakfast, but I can tell she's spotted the carrier in the corner of the room and is wary. I've watched countless online videos that show how to load a cat into a carrier, but none of the cats in them seem to transform into thrashing wild animals in the way that mine does when I want her to do something she doesn't like. I have a suspicion that the cats in the videos are sedated. Sure enough, the usual tussle ensues, and by the time I've managed to get her body and all of her limbs inside and close the door, she's a hissing ball of rage, and I'm nursing a couple of livid scratch marks on my forearms. Ignoring her yowls of displeasure, I pack a bag with her bedding, a couple of her favourite toys, and her food. The journey isn't much better. I turn up the radio to try and drown out the furious yowling coming from the back of the car. She has a habit of wetting herself whenever I drive her anywhere, so I bought myself a rubber boot liner some time ago, which I can just wipe clean when I need to. When we get there, I'm not at all surprised to see the usual puddle. I've got tissues and wet wipes, so I'll deal with that after I've dropped her off. Despite the friendly greetings from the staff, she's still in a foul temper when I leave her. I do feel guilty, but the cattery is very nice, and I know she settles in fine, because they send regular video updates. By the time I've cleared out the mess in the boot, driven home and loaded my luggage, it's nearly 11 o'clock. My sat-nav is predicting just under 5 hours to Morganporth, but I'll need a couple of toilet stops and a lunch break, so I suspect it will be nearer 6 hours in total, which gives me an hour's leeway before I fall foul of the deadline. Let's just hope there aren't any accidents or other traffic problems. Mum and Lily will never let me hear the end of it if I'm late. One of the reasons I try not to spend too much time with my family is that it forces me to confront where it all went wrong. I was close to my mum when I was growing up, and I got on reasonably well with my older brother Andrew, even if Rose and I fought most of the time. When Lily was born, I genuinely wasn't jealous of her. Yes, it meant that I wasn't the youngest anymore, and I had to share mum with yet another sibling, but there was still plenty of love and laughter to go around. Where does my dad fit into all this? He doesn't, not really. He was always at work in the week, tired in the evenings, and his weekends were filled with tasks like mowing the lawn and washing the car. He pretty much left the parenting to my mother, and on the rare occasions when she demanded he intervene, he'd always say something like, "Do what your mother tells you," and that would be the end of it. He's best described as benign but detached. Things first started to deteriorate when I hit puberty. Suddenly my body was changing in all sorts of ways, and I was fascinated by it. As the hormones kicked in, I began to understand what it meant to be a sexual human being. We'd been taught the basics of how reproduction happened at school, and I'd been as certain as all the other girls in the class that there was no way we would ever let any boy do that to us. It all sounded absolutely appalling when I was 11. At 14, though, it didn't sound appalling at all. It sounded like it might be fun. I wasn't ready to try it myself, but I wanted to know everything about it. Whenever I was on the family computer and nobody was around, I searched online for all the information I could find about sex. I learned very quickly to steer well clear of the videos, but I devoured any articles I could find. You know the type. 10 ways to improve your orgasm, 20 positions to try this summer, that sort of thing. If they were particularly good, I'd print them off and hide them under my mattress in the bunk bed I shared with Rose, so I could read them over when I was alone. Naturally, it was only a matter of time before I was found out. Dad was looking through the search history for the website of a plumbing supplier he'd visited a few days before, and all the sites I'd been browsing also came up. Rose and I were watching TV in the living room when it had all kicked off, primed seats for the family drama, as it turned out. I remember the conversation as if it happened yesterday. "Hazel, can I borrow you for a moment?" he'd begun, innocently enough. "There's something on the computer I don't understand." "You know I hate that thing," Mum had countered from the kitchen. "Ask one of the children." I think I'd like you to see it first. Oh, for goodness sake, she'd exclaimed, marching into the sitting room in her apron. What is it? I'm in the middle of getting dinner ready. It seems someone has been using the computer to look at... And here he'd lowered his voice to a stage whisper. Sex stuff. There was an agonising pause while she looked through the list, before she screeched up the stairs. Andrew, come down here at once. What? He'd asked a few moments later. Don't what me. Mum's face was almost puce with rage. You've been looking at filth, haven't you? No. Don't lie. The computer has the evidence. That wasn't me, he'd insisted, before peering more closely at the screen. Why would I be interested in that? To this day, I don't know which link he'd selected, but it was obviously something relating purely to female pleasure, because Mum's fury was immediately diverted onto Rose and me. Which one of you girls is it? She hissed. Poppy, Rose had answered immediately. She's got a whole load of dirty stuff under her mattress. I can show you. A quick search of our bedroom was enough to convict me, and after taking away all my pieces of paper, Mum subjected me to a long lecture, which was supposed to leave me in no doubt that sex was dirty, shameful, and should only ever happen within a marriage. Unfortunately for her, it had completely the opposite effect. My natural curiosity couldn't stop picking over the contradiction between what I'd read and what she had said. They couldn't both be right, could they? There was only one way to find out. I started going out with Finley when I was 15. He was everything I thought I wanted in a boy. He was good-looking and muscly, and I couldn't wait to try sex for real with him. When we eventually got the opportunity at his parents' house after school one day, I was trembling with excitement and nerves. But the sex was wildly disappointing. It wasn't anything like what I'd read about, and I cried afterwards, thinking that my mum must have been right after all, and the internet was just one big lie. We tried again, several times, and it did get better, but it was still nowhere near what I'd been led to expect. I wondered whether it was something wrong with Finley, so I dated a few other boys in the school after we split up, but the spark never happened, and I developed a bit of an unfortunate reputation in the process. Once again, Rose dobbed me into Mum after she'd heard some boys joking about me, and I was subjected to another long lecture about girls with loose morals, grounded for a month, and dragged to the doctor for a checkup. It wasn't until I left school and started going out with Jack, a 25-year-old guy I met at my gap year job, that it finally clicked. He was the first man who took time to find out what worked for me, and I loved him for it. I still look back on the few months that we were together before I left to go to university as one of the happiest times of my life. My interest in therapy started while I was at university. I was in a tight-knit group of girls on my psychology course, and they talked openly and freely about their sex lives. I quickly learned that most of them weren't having great sex either, and that they felt it was something they had to do to keep their boyfriends happy rather than something they actively enjoyed. Armed with my years of research and my experience with Jack, I counselled them and felt a rush of pleasure when they told me what a difference I'd made. Needless to say, both my parents were horrified when I told them that I intended to train as a counsellor and then specialise in sex and relationships. My mother banned me from even mentioning it in the house, in case I corrupted Lily with my filth. I moved out of the family home in Paddock Wood, into a shared flat as soon as I was able, saved like mad to raise the deposit for my little house in Tunbridge, and I haven't looked back. Since then, my interactions with my family have been as short as I could make them. I see them for birthdays, Christmas, and life events like weddings and christenings, and that's about as much as I can tolerate. The rest of them are all still as close as ever, which makes the unfairness of it all even more acute. Andrew and Rose both drop in to see my parents with their families on a regular basis, and Lily is only leaving home now that she's getting married. I can't help thinking that she's rushing into it at 23, but I've been told firmly to mind my own business whenever I've tried to raise it. To be fair, with the exception of me, my family have all married young. One thing is certain, this is going to be an exceptionally trying week, and I'm going to have to bite my tongue most of the way through it. Chapter 4. It's 5 to 6 when I pull up outside the house my parents have rented in Morganporth. The driveway is nearly full, but I just about manage to squeeze in. The front door flies open as I'm grabbing my cases out of the boot. Poppy, where have you been? My mother